Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sorted for Path of Exile. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that the Sorted series for me is just a series where we talk about some of the different mechanics in the game and we try to break them down into more bite-sized chunks that are easier for a newer player to understand. So today I thought what I might do is kind of do a little bit about rolling maps. If you're familiar with Path of Exile, which I'm sure you are if you're watching this video, you know that at the end game, a large part of what people do is mapping. And it's pretty important to know actually how to roll your maps, especially as you advance in map tiers, because at a certain point it becomes much harder for you to actually sustain your map pool, and as you level you'll get increasingly less amounts of experience out of the lower level maps. So if you want to keep leveling your character, it's very important that you actually know how to roll your maps so that you get enough map drops to sustain your pool. Uh, so what we're going to do, I've got two maps set aside here. I've got one that you would classify as like a low tier map, and then one that's a mid-tier map, and then I don't actually have a high-tier map set aside. Maybe I could pull one out. Let's go here. Which I think 76s are still classified as mid-tier. I think 77 is kind of the cutoff. I think the tier, GGG has separated out maps starting with the Awakening into three different tiers, and the tiers are progressively kind of harder to maintain. So you have a low tier, which is 68 to 72, a mid tier, which I believe is 72 to 76, and then an upper tier, which I think is 77 to 82. So anyways, as you move up in the map tiers, it becomes, like I said, progressively harder to continue maintaining those maps. So good, you've got some maps. Let's say you're new and you've got some 68 maps, and you want to make sure that you get the most amount of return out of your map that you can possibly get, whether it's other maps to keep mapping, or if it's currency, or if it's other loot. So you have the option of taking your map and going to the Eternal Laboratory and dropping it in and running it white, completely white, and there will be no increased item quantity on it. Nothing like that. So it'll just drop as it is. However, what you want to do is you want to add some quantity to that, some item quantity, so that more items drop in the map, because when more items drop, that's basically more tosses of the dice, more chances to get shinies. So I've got this 68 dunes map here, and what you'd want to do if you were wanting to roll this map is you'd want to go to your currency. You can craft maps in much the same manner that you actually craft gear, by making them magic or rare and adding affixes to them and re-rolling those affixes. So with a 68 map, typically what people will do is one of two things. Now, they'll either go with an orb of transmutation to take it to a blue, and then they will roll orbs of alteration on it until they get what they feel is a favorable combination of affixes with a suitable amount of quantity added to it. Now, rolling your map this way will give you maps that are probably fairly easy to do, and if you're a new player, it's a good way to kind of get your feet under you with mapping. However, you're not going to get a whole lot of quantity on it, because with a blue map you can only have two affixes on it, and each affix is worth a different amount of quantity. Now, GGG has established some values, arbitrary values that they have for different kinds of affixes yielding different amounts of quantity. So easier affixes to complete will not give you as much quantity. So why don't we go ahead and we'll just treat this one like a blue. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab a transmute, and I'm going to transmute it. So when I transmuted it, it became an armored dunes map of lightning. Now, as you can see, it has 24% quantity and 12% item rarity. What it did is it added a prefix and a suffix to it. It says area has patches of shocking ground and plus 20% monster physical damage reduction. So what you would do at this point is you would look at the quantity and the rarity, of course, and then you would think about your character. You would think about what the strengths and weaknesses of your character are. This map, it's blue. It's probably not going to be very difficult to do for any character, but if you had a character that was solely based around doing physical damage to monsters, and you found that it was fairly challenging outside of maps in, say, Act 3 Merciless or even Act 4 Merciless, this might be a fix that you might want to roll again just to change that so that you're doing that extra damage. If you're not good at keeping track of where you're standing, maybe shocking ground would be something that you'd want to roll off, because when you're standing in the shocking ground, you can take a lot more damage. So we'll just say that this is a map that I don't feel comfortable running. So what can I do? Well, you go to your orbs of alteration and you click it, and boom, it rolls it. Well, this time basically all it did was it took the prefix off of it, and now area has patches of shocking ground. But you can see that that particular suffix, shocking ground, the lightning, is only worth 12% quantity and 6% rarity. So whenever you have a map that has one mod on it that you're fine with, and it's blue, and you say, okay, of lightning, I can handle that, no problem, the quantity looks good, but you want to add a little bit more quantity to it, what you can do is you can use your orbs of augmentation, just like you would with the blue item, and you can use that to add an affix to it. So it added the Overlord's prefix, which gave it some buffs to the boss. So the unique boss will deal more damage and have increased attack and cast speed. And it gave it an additional 10% quantity and 5% rarity. So that is what you would do to make a map blue. But as you can see, it only has 22% quantity on it, so it's really only going to be just a little bit above what you would normally get from running it white. But then again, we really didn't invest a whole lot of currency in it either. Now you could, at this point, just like you can with a blue item, you could regal orb this, and it would add another affix to it and make it rare. However, I don't really recommend doing that with maps, because it's only going to add one more affix to it when you regal it, I believe, and it's not really a good investment, I don't think. So you need to have it in your mind what you're going to do with your map, whether you're going to want to do it blue or you're going to want to do it yellow. Okay, so, but you could also, instead of running it blue, I actually recommend, even for 68 maps, running them yellow. So what you would want to do is you'd want to grab a map. So we'll grab this dungeon map and head back to our currency. And what you would do is you would just grab an orb of alchemy and alch it. And as you can see, it added much more in terms of affixes, but it also has much more quantity and rarity on it. It's a pretty big difference. But with more affixes, potentially comes more challenge. You can see this one has some chilled ground. Monsters have a chance to avoid status ailments. It also has the turbo cluster, which is anytime you have the movement speed, attack speed, and cast speed, I call that turbo, and a lot of people do. And then also monsters will fire 2 additional projectiles, and they gain 1 frenzy charge every 20 seconds. So, if you just want to think about it, and you'd want to say, well, I know that it's probably going to have a lot of projectile spewing monsters, such as the ladies who shoot the spikes, and the bird thing, I can't remember the proper name for it. I always call it a chimera, but it's not a chimera. There's a different thing that's a chimera. That shoots spikes from its tail. You're going to have archers and things like that. If you have a character that's vulnerable to projectiles and you don't feel comfortable with it, this might not be a map for you. So what you could do at this point is you could use a chaos orb on it to re-roll this. However, when you're doing like low tier maps, it's usually not a very good idea to roll it again with a chaos, because these maps cost less than a chaos already. It's a 68. It's dirt cheap, really. So investing a chaos on top of an alch onto a 68 map, probably not the wisest decision. So what you would do is you would just shelf it and get a new map until you could handle it. Okay, so that's generally what I recommend and what people tend to do for the lower tier maps. Now, for a mid-tier map, so I've got a 72 bog here. For a mid-tier map, generally this is the point at which I recommend turning on the chisel machine. So what a chisel does, a chisel increases the quality of a map. Now you want to chisel it before you make it magic for the same reason that you apply your whetstones and your armor scraps to your items before you make them magical as well. You'll get a lot more mileage out of your chisels this way, and chisels aren't cheap. Typically chisels go from anywhere for 2 to 3 for a chaos. So to make a map 20%, you're actually investing about a chaos into it just with the chisels. So what you do is you'll just chisel it 4 times, and you can see it added 20% quantity to the map. All right, and then what I recommend for mid-tier maps, I don't recommend transmuting them blue. I recommend just you need to go ahead and alch it. And it rolled 2 additional rogue exiles, 20% increased AoE, 40% cold resistance, and 2 unique bosses. So again, just like with the 68s, you'd want to think about the map, think about what's on the map now, because if you had a map such as like museum, and it rolled twinned on it and gave you double the bosses, you have to think that's 6 bosses that are already pretty dangerous in that tiny room. So that would be a situation where you actually, in a mid-tier map, you might actually want to chaos it. But there's another option too that you can do, even on the lower tier maps, but I don't recommend doing it on the low tier maps. On the mid-tier maps, and especially on the high-tier maps, what some people, including myself, have been doing to get just that little bit of extra quantity in an attempt to sustain our map pool is we have been using Veil Orbs. Now, Veil Orbs can, as it says, corrupts an item, modifying it unpredictably. For a map, what that means is it can do a few things. First thing it can do is, well, nothing. It can corrupt the map and do absolutely nothing other than it corrupts the boss, and then the boss can drop sacrifice pieces or veil gems, which can be pretty nice. The second thing that it can do is it can actually make the map unidentified. So then you run the map unidentified, but an unidentified map gives you 30% more quantity. So that also not necessarily a bad thing. The third thing that it can do is it can actually bump the map up 1 level. So then you can, instead of having a bog map, you'd have a 73 map. Can be a decent way to get some maps at higher levels. If it's a low tier map and you Veil Orb it and that happens, it's not really that good of a thing. I mean, it's a little bit better, but it really starts to become nice whenever you Veil Orb, a higher level map like a 74 or 75, and it gives you a higher level map. So, but it can only be 1 level higher. And then the last thing that it can do when you Veil Orb it is it can completely re-roll the properties on the map. It can be up to 8. So you can get an insane amount of quantity on a map by doing that. The highest I've ever seen on a map was about 150%, but I have heard other people talk about getting like 170 quant on maps. So let's just throw a Veil Orb on this and see what happens. Okay, so in this situation, the first thing that I mentioned happened. It corrupted it to no other effect. So when I go in there, both of the bosses are going to be corrupted. They will both have a chance to drop sacrifice fragments or veil gems. Now, it's not 100% though. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But, it's a nice thing a lot of times on maps where you have multiple bosses, because each one will have a chance. So theoretically, you could have like 2 sacrifice at midnight's drop, which would be a huge profit margin on this map. Okay, and another thing that you can do to get a little bit of extra quantity out of the map, if you have a lot of sacrifice fragments, floating around is you can take a sacrifice fragment and you can go to your map device and you drop the map in and drop the sacrifice fragment in the device, and each fragment that you drop will boost the quantity as well. Now, since we're here, I'll go ahead and talk about this too. Another thing that you can do is you can use Zana, if she's in your hideout, to put these league-specific mods onto maps. Now, normally it only costs this amount of chaos. Normally it doesn't cost the Veil Orbs. The reason the Veil Orbs are here is because anytime you corrupt the map, it's going to make you pay it an equal amount in Veil Orbs as well. Now, you're probably thinking, some of these are a little bit expensive. Why would I do this? Well, there are reasons. Number one, some of these can add quite a bit of quantity to your map. Number two, and this is what a lot of people do, is whenever you're doing these maps, say if I put Onslaught on this map, any monster in this map can actually drop league-specific uniques that you could only find from Onslaught. Also, you could take in items and chance orb them in this map with Onslaught on it, and you could chance orb those uniques as well. So a lot of people have been doing that with Agate amulets and leather belts, trying to get Vol's Devotion and headhunters. Alright, enough of that. So, let's talk about this. Now we're going to treat this like it's a high tier map, but in actuality it's not. Although 76s are not easy to come by, especially for newer players. So it's kind of the same thing as a mid-tier map, really. You're definitely going to want to chisel it. Now, you could make a little bit of an argument not to chisel like a 72. Maybe you want to start at 73 or 74, and that's fine. But once you start to get up to about 75 or 76, you need to be chiseling your maps. And then after you chisel it, of course, you're definitely going to want to alch it. Now, at this point, with 76s, you have options. You could Chaos Orb this to try to re-roll it into something better, or you could just go straight for the Veil, which is what I've been doing. I've been using the Veil Orbs. Only thing about using Veil Orbs once you get up to this point is once something is corrupted, you can't craft on it anymore. So if you have a high level map and you Veil Orb it and you get some affixes that you just absolutely can't do with your build, rip map. You can either sell it, you can vendor it like using the 3 of to get a higher level map, or it can sit in your inventory, or you can try it and die, I guess. So that's just something to be aware of, because at 74, a lot of the mods are reintroduced, because from 68 to 73, it's kind of like mapping on training wheels. What GGG did is they took a lot of the really nasty mods out, and they kept them out for the purpose of people kind of getting their feet under them in terms of mapping and seeing how to roll things. But by the time that you get up to the higher level maps, GGG expects you to kind of have a grasp on what your character can and can't handle. So, you would look at this and you'd say, all right, well, this is a residence, so the boss is going to be pretty tough. And, you're going to have elemental equilibrium. They're going to be avoiding elemental status ailments. They're going to do some extra damage as fire, some extra damage as cold. All in all, these affixes for most players probably aren't really that bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Veil Orb it, and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so it did the exact same thing that it did on the other one. It just corrupted it. No other changes to it. So anyways, that's basically what you do to roll maps. Now there are other things that you could do that maybe are a little bit more advanced, but for a new player, that's really what you need to know. And I guess I'll close this video out with a tip, something that I feel pretty strongly about. A lot of new players, when they get into mapping, they get really excited because mapping is pretty fun. But what the mistake that a lot of new players make is what they want to do is they always want to run the highest level map they have, and that's a mistake. You want to build up a nice foundation of maps. You know, you don't want to always be like trying to jump levels. So what that would mean is you want to run 68s until you have a good amount of 69s to run. You know, say 20, 10 or 20. And then, once you get into your 69s, you want to do the same thing for 70 and the same thing for 71 and the same thing for 72. And as you're going, hopefully bosses will be dropping some +2 maps for you, because bosses are the only mobs in maps now that can drop maps that are +2 levels. You know, Before the Awakening, any yellow mob could also drop those, but now that they've changed it, with the bosses are the only ones that can do it, and bosses only drop maps 20% of the time. So if you're always trying to push your highest level map that you got, what's going to happen is you're just going to get frustrated. Probably, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to say, why can't I sustain at this level? And the reason is because you haven't built up a proper map base. So, just to kind of show you my map base that I've been working with, you can see I have a lot of lower tier maps. So many so that I pretty much convert a lot of the 68s and 69s into chisels, and I'm constantly having to do the 3 map recipe. If you look at my mid-tier maps, you can see that right now I have quite a few 73s and 74s, and this is typically what I've been running. I've been chasing a lot of 4 dots, so I haven't really been faithful with just these levels. And I do have a few 75s and a couple 76s, but it would be a bad idea for me right now to actually do these 75s and 76s and expect to sustain that. Now, I could get lucky. I could go in and see a Carto box and roll that Carto box and jackpot, the dream. But chances are that's probably not going to happen. And what's going to happen is I'm going to run these 7 maps. I might get a map or 2 out of it, maybe more if I'm lucky. But yeah, because I don't have the base built up for that. I don't want to go to 75 probably until I have this whole row filled at least. So anyways, so that's maps. If you have any questions about it, feel free to leave me a comment on this video. You can also contact me in game, just like send a message to Nerdstalgic, and I would be more than happy to help you out with anything. Any questions you have, feel free to shoot them my way. I don't know everything, but I can probably find somebody who does, or find the answer on the internet. So yeah. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful for you and entertaining. And my next plan is I think I'm going to start kind of doing some sporadic videos where I actually kind of show you the maps with the intent of showing you what the bosses are for the maps and kind of how I deal with them, and also kind of going over like looting, like what I pick up, and specifically like when I identify things, like what I'm looking for. So, and hopefully that'll help you guys out too. But anyways, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time. Game on.